Well, hey everyone, my name is Ron. I'm the lead pastor here at Vitalpoint Church, and I am so glad you are here today. We really love walking with people and journeying with them as they explore and grow in their understanding and knowledge of Jesus Christ and commitment to his church. So no matter where you find yourself today in your spiritual journey, I am so glad that you are part of this today. I love hearing about the stories that are happening through this series that we've been in called Jesus Said What. There's been a lot of creative, reflective conversations that have been happening because the series is really forcing us to look deep within ourselves. I also love the fact that many of our connect groups that use the material that we produce from Sunday mornings are using it in such a way to create such great, deep conversations. And we're learning to hear and see how these things that we're talking about are really settling deep within us. We create all this content every week, and I just love the fact that we're working so hard to work through these things. You may not be aware of this, but we also have this thing called Vital Moments. It's our podcast. It's a shorter version of the messages that we do in interview style. I hope that you'll maybe check that out one day. You may not be familiar with the section of the Bible that we've been using in our series called the series Jesus Said What. We've been looking at what is called the Sermon on the Mount. And the key to the entire series is actually found not in Matthew chapter 5, 6, or 7. It's actually found in a verse just prior to section 5. It's Matthew 4:17. It says this, "From that time, Jesus began to preach, saying, 'Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.'" This is key for us to understand, and this is why. Everything Jesus did and taught was pointing to the kingdom of God. So when he sits down on the Sermon on the Mount and he begins to rapid fire teach these things, he's actually teaching a kingdom ethic that is from beyond, that has relevance for today, pointing to the kingdom of heaven. The teaching of the Sermon on the Mount reveals what does it mean to be a person who follows Jesus, who lives within the reality of the kingdom of heaven. And we're recognizing one of the very important truths that is emerging from this teachings is this: to be a follower of Jesus is not for the faint of heart. See, if you're looking for a faith hack, or if you're looking for an app to make life and faith easy, you need to know there isn't one. Matter of fact, I would go as far to say this: faith is formed in the trenches of consistent obedience to the ways of Jesus. See, when Jesus sat down to teach through the kingdom ethic, he was speaking directly to the disciples that sat close to him in this moment. But we also recognize that the crowds would have gathered as well and pressing in. What I love is that Jesus is not hiding any of these truths. He's not holding back on the hard stuff of what it means to be a disciple. And he leans right in on these truths. Like, for example, last week, we talked about this idea of loving your enemies and praying for those who persecute you. I mean, let's face it, you and I would probably agree that it's much easier to be defensive or to be angry or to take revenge. There's less effort in those things. But Jesus says, "My kingdom is about wishing the best for those that hurt you or may abuse you or take advantage of you, praying for your enemies." See, we recognize that that is not easy to do. That is very difficult to do, especially the praying part. I mean, yeah, unless we're praying for someone to get run over by a bus, it is difficult to pray for our enemies. I was reflecting on last week's message a little bit, and I was thinking about Judas. Judas was one of the 12 disciples that Jesus invited to follow him. But Jesus invited Judas to follow even though he knew that he would betray him one day. Judas sold Jesus out for pieces of silver. Jesus still loved him and had him close to his teachings, revealing who he was and who Jesus was and what he desired for Judas, but Judas still betrayed him. See, Jesus never taught anything that he would not have lived out himself, and that he gave these teachings from a kingdom perspective with a kingdom weight because it's leaned in truth. John Stott said this about the Sermon on the Mount. So, Jesus confronts us with himself, sets before us the radical choice between obedience and disobedience, and calls us to an unconditional commitment of mind, will, and life to his teachings. I mean, this is the reality of what we've been talking about now for a number of weeks, is that Jesus' teaching disrupts our idea of life and freedom. He disrupts cultural norms with a kingdom norm, which moves us towards establishing what the kingdom of heaven looks like in this world that we get to be part of. That in our sovereignty, we get to choose obedience or disobedience. See, Jesus doesn't let up on the hard teachings. He gives us everything so we begin to understand, what does it actually mean to follow him? So today, we're going to jump into some teachings around our treasure, around money, that I believe is going to be one that's going to transform actually what does it mean to follow Jesus in this way, in this world in which we live in. I want to read it for you. It's found in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. Listen to this or read along with me. It'll be on the screen. Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also, he says. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Now, there's a lot going on in here in these verses, and I want to break it down for us to help us better understand what does it mean to follow Jesus. Jesus is helping the listener understand that there is an earthly reality and that there's a reality beyond. There's a kingdom that we see and experience and accumulate things in. That's called earth, the place which we move in. It's the physical realities of our lives. It's where we work. It's where we play. It's where we go on vacation. It's where we buy things, where we go to campfires, host parties. This is the part of what makes human beings so incredible, is that we get to enjoy the creation in which we live in. We get to enjoy it and extract joy and happiness in this realm, in this reality. And honestly, for me, this time of the year, as spring rolls around, I love this time of year. Like the trees are budding, the grass is green. We get to occupy this space and we get to enjoy this earthly reality. But then Jesus says something very interesting. He says we have to be careful and cautious in this space, in this reality called earth. Because the realization is this: we can become distracted by the strong voices that make us think that this is all life is about. It begins to tell us that we can grab as much as we can, that we must accumulate as much as we can, that we must have more experiences in the reality of this life in which we live in. And we begin to believe and are taught and are actually even discipled towards this idea is that when you accumulate, when you actually receive and get more stuff, is where your satisfaction and where your happiness will come from. It all sounds good in the initial stages, but Jesus is saying, be aware of this. It even tells us in this earthly reality that when you have a bad day, or when maybe you're a little bit depressed or a little bit discouraged, that you can actually go out and you can buy your happiness, because this reality of desire will be fulfilled with the things that you have. For example, you need that bigger house because every kid needs their own room. So we look for our forever home or some other idea in which we find ourselves being drawn to. We look at someone else's life and we think, I want that life, so I will do what they did. I will follow them because they look successful and I want to be like them. Jesus puts out the warning, do not lay up your treasures on earth. What he's actually saying is this: the world, the earthly reality of which we've been talking about, overpromises and underdelivers because it is temporary. It's why he says moth, rust, and thieves will actually destroy the things of this world. As I wrote that, I had this funny moment where I started thinking about my wife and I. We had this 1987 Honda Civic hatchback. And I wonder where it is right now. Like, who's driving it, or is it in a small, crushed up little box somewhere in some dump? See, the treasure here Jesus is talking about is actually a very interesting word because it actually goes beyond just the possessions. It's really driving home this idea of a disordered heart of a person that's marked by sin, that has a deep desire to acquire in search of contentment and joy. This is a reality check for us. Humans, ever since the moment we destroyed God's paradise and his perfect peace by disobeying God's direction, we have been, as human beings, in search of contentment and satisfaction. It is the deep desire that we all have inside of us. And actually what happens to us if we're not careful is that we begin to turn these things into idols in our lives. So what is an idol? It's placing value in something, believing it can give you what you're searching for in life. So it controls you. It dictates your life. Everything about your life revolves around it. Matter of fact, we could probably, for some of us, me included, talk about the reality of this right here for some of us has become our idol. We hold it, we cherish it, it dings, we run to it, we respond to it. It now controls our life. For many of us, it's become that idol. Jesus says it so clear. Within my kingdom, it's not about prioritizing the things of this world. It's actually a single focus on the reality beyond. This is what he says in verses 20 and 21, right? He says, but lay up for yourself treasure in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He's saying, if you live prioritizing this world, you will be left empty. But if you live with a focus on God's kingdom, you'll be living in the reality of a greater purpose, and the things in our lives will have the right place. See, the reality beyond is the kingdom of God, the eternal kingdom. And it's a future reality, but it is also here and now, which we get to experience, not in full, just in part. When Jesus returns, we will experience the eternal kingdom in full. But we cannot be distracted by the things of this world. Let's draw this out as when we think about prioritizing the eternal part of who we are when it comes to our treasure. See, what I believe Jesus is actually trying to drive home in this narrative of teaching is this. It comes down to three words. It comes down to three words. Being able to actually say them to Jesus is this: I trust you. I trust you. See, this is really the heart of the section of what we're talking about. Can I trust Jesus? Will I fully trust in him? Our theme of the year at Vitalpoint Church is what? To be boldly dependent upon God. See, it's about releasing ourselves from the things of this world and holding fast to the presence and provision and power of God. Can I get to that place where I can say, God, I trust you? Now, some of you have heard me teach on this section before, and please understand, this is not a money conversation, although sometimes we have to have these money conversations because we can get out of alignment with our money, especially within the kingdom of heaven. But when I think about in this idea of I trust you and the treasures and all that, is I begin to realize that one of the things that keeps people from taking a step forward in giving and tithing is this reality of learning to trust God, that what he says can be true. So that when I begin to give back a portion of what I have to God, which is what we refer to as the tenth or the tithe, it is already his. So when I say, can I trust you with this? Can I give this back to you? Because here's the reality of what Jesus is driving home, is that our treasure and our possessions reveal the priority in our lives. So if we're always trying to consume and accumulate and try to get more, and if it's in the wrong sequence in our lives, then it becomes a dangerous place and leads us often to ruin and despair. But where I can trust God, I can say, I'm going to trust you with this. I'm going to give you a portion back, which is already his anyway. We don't have time to build that truth out, but I'm going to give you already what is yours. Then I'm saying, I'm prioritizing you, God. I'm trusting you, God, that the rest is what we will be able to live on. See, fear will often fly in the face of faith and diminish our ability to trust God. I love this verse. It's found in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. It says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." The fear is real. We get that. It's a reality check for all of us. But it is not of God. It is not in the character of God to create this in us. God has given us, for those who are followers of Jesus Christ, the spirit of power, love, and self-control. Fear limits our ability to trust God in these moments. I was thinking about this as I was thinking about the future of our church, and I was thinking about the vision of our church a little bit. As I think about the treasures on earth and the treasures in heaven, there's right now, as some of you are aware, we're going to be launching our 4th site next year, spring 2024 in Forest, Ontario. Now, when I say that, for some of us, something inside of us goes off. There's like a nudge inside of us. We have this sense, and it's kind of like this little bit of feeling, should I go and be part of that? Should I go and should I move to Forest? Should I be part of Vitalpoint Church there? But your job will change, right? And maybe if your job changes, you'll take home less. So we work through the discerning process, and it is God. You can stay in that high-paying job, or you can trust that God is going to provide, and you take that step of faith. Am I going to trust God? Am I going to put my faith in God? Will I see myself in a faith-formed relationship step into that moment? Now, some of you are right now going, Ron, where does this illustration come from? Like, it doesn't make any sense, because that's crazy town, and you're right. But here's the thing. We have people right now at Vitalpoint Church at our sites that are literally thinking about and contemplating moving to Forest to be part of that. And what they're trying to work through is this idea of where my treasure is, there my heart is also. Trusting God, believing in God that he will provide. Now, we got to keep moving because we got still quite a bit of ground to cover. And we're going to go into the next couple verses. And these next couple of verses, to be honest with you, are a little bit of a head scratcher. So just stay with me on this for a minute. It's verses 22 and 23. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Now, I can only imagine some guy sitting in the crowd, maybe it's one of the disciples, and they have no sweet clue what Jesus is talking about here, but they're just agreeing because they're afraid to ask, what in the world does this mean? Well, let's talk about it. He's talking about the eye, he's talking about light, and he's talking about darkness. What he's talking about here is two things. The difference between intromission and extramission. And you're like, what is that? Intromission is the light that comes into or enters into our body through our eyes. Extramission is the light being sent from inside our body. So the eye is the window for light, but what Jesus is referring to as it connects to the treasure is this, is that the realization is this, that Jesus is actually referring to the heart in this thing. I mean, the entire Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is driving everything to the heart. It's the place where desire and passions are found. He's referring to extramission of one's life, that the heart is full of this inner light, which is the light of Jesus. We need to be clear on this. It's not your light that you muster up. It's not some weird new age energy. It is the light of Jesus Christ in us. then what happens to us is that when we see through that light of Christ in us, through our eyes, as the lamp, as that vision portal, what we recognize is that the things of this world have their right place and they don't have that pull on us. Okay? Stay with me. So when you see that new self-driving car, you think to yourself, oh, that's really nice. Or you think about that new bigger house or the pillows or the jeans or the new black Adidas shoes. When your eye is filled with the light of Christ, these things, they're not bad, but these things actually have their right place. If we are comfortably numbed by the things of this world, then what happens is we see these things through the darkness of our hearts. You ever seen The Lord of the Rings, that creepy little character with the ring? It's the ring dynamic. The inner darkness of the heart will be used to create idols out of the things of this world. God gave a very clear directive in his top 10 list when he talked to Moses, where he says, you shall not make yourself carved images. See, our human tendency is to place a high value on things and they become idols in our lives. So a life ignited by the inner light of Christ sees a kingdom beyond, but is fueled by the darkness, we're captured by the things of this world. We have to be aware that we have a good source and a bad source for our lives, and our treasures reveal which source is the prominent one in our lives. I mean, this is such an incredible teaching when you think about it. Jesus is making it so incredibly clear for us that we have to be aware that we can so easily become consumed of the things of this world, that we can be captured by them, that the darkness of this world, and even within ourselves at times, can draw us away from the things of eternal matters. But Jesus isn't done. Like, this is the most incredible. Jesus doesn't hold back at all in this section, because he's navigating us through, he's teaching us, he's directing us to this place. And it's verse 24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. At this point, the guy in the back of the crowd puts his hand up and says, Jesus, can you go a little easier on us, please? Because this seems a little bit hard. See, I wonder if Jesus doesn't hold back because many believe that they can hold on to both worlds at the same time. 1 foot in the reality of this earth and 1 foot in the reality of the kingdom of heaven. That we can have a little bit of Jesus and a little bit of the world all mixed together. And Jesus says, you cannot have two masters. He's driving it home for us. What is a master? A master is someone or something that owns us. You'll hate the one, love the other. Devoted to one, despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. I'm amazed at the drawing out of this truth for us today. I mean, we've been talking a lot about this in this series. This is not surface level, fluffy stuff. This is deep level stuff. And I know for some of us, you're like, I'm just new to church. I'm not even sure if I believe in God or the Bible or Jesus. And you're going, wow, this is really heavy stuff. But for others of us, this is a realignment. See, the way to guard our heart from the pull of this world is to prioritize the kingdom of heaven with our treasure, because where our treasure is, our hearts follow. The way we break free from the money being a really bad master is by investing in the kingdom things so that our hearts follow after the things of God. Think about Judas again. Judas betrays Jesus. Judas was controlled by money, and it led him to make a deal with the religious elite to betray Jesus. See, if our possessions, our money, our time are not directed towards the things of God, then we live in the danger zone of being lured away by the things of this world. Teenagers, young adults that are watching and listening right now, hear my words on this. I hope and pray that you will lean into this now before you get captured by the things of this world, if you haven't already. That you will find freedom in the realization that your life can be directed towards the things of eternal value and eternal merit. Like, for example, you have a paper route and you get that little check at the end of the month. Take a little bit of that and direct it towards the things of God through his church so that your heart will move towards the things of God. Think about your treasure. Think about your time. Guard each and every piece of this so that your heart doesn't get pulled away. This is why I think it's absolutely essential, even when it comes to time, and why we set aside the first day of the week for God. And so we set it aside to show God our seriousness about our following him. And we make every effort possible to be in gathering together. Why? Because it's a necessary piece to set the week aside to be holy for the rest of the week. See, Jesus isn't suggesting a better way of life. See, some people think that the Christian faith is about, picking an option off of a shelf, that maybe I pick this and this is a good option to a better life. No, Jesus is giving the only way within his kingdom. It's why so many in the crowd didn't follow him, right? When he would actually go to the cross, so very few stayed with him. When he came out of the tomb, there was only about 120 followers left. 3 years of teaching and revealing the kingdom of heaven. But there were so few that found themselves still following him. Scott McKnight says this about this section of Jesus' teaching. He says, "Live simply. Possessions are mysteriously adulterous. Trust God." See, I want you to hear my words on this. And I think we need to close with this. And it draws us back to something that I said earlier. See, one of the greatest dangers in our Western faith mindset is that when a follower of Jesus becomes comfortably numb in the reality of this world and forgets the reality of the kingdom beyond. Now, let me say this. It's not that the things of this world are bad or wrong necessarily in some of the things that illustrations that I gave. It's making sure that these things have the right place in our lives. That's what I think Jesus is trying to drive home for us, is that our heart is to be towards the things of God, towards the things of his eternal value. Don't be distracted by the accumulation of things. Allow them to have their right place. And I think for some of us, it's so easy that we've allowed ourselves to slip and to fall into this trap. And by no means are you a bad person. By no means is it that you have failed. That is the beauty and the wonder of God's grace, is that when we are captured by the things of this world, that we can actually come back to him, that we can confess them, that we can own the reality and the fact that we've wandered away, and we can step into the beauty of the relationship. For some, it's just a subtle change. For some, it's just a little tweak here and there. But for others, maybe it's a big step in a direction towards the things of God. Maybe it's untangling ourselves from this idea that if I have more things, then I'll be happy. If I have more things, I'd find real joy. And maybe it's realizing that where we find the true life according to the kingdom of God is found in relationship with Jesus Christ, formed and strengthened in the power of the Holy Spirit, working in our lives, transforming us into the image of Jesus Christ. The Sermon on the Mount that Jesus teaches in this moment on treasure is a powerful reality check. And like me, I hope like me, you'll understand that I've had to do this work too this week. Have I been drawn away? Have I allowed myself to be pulled towards the things of this world? And have I given them the wrong place in my life? I hope today that you will take the time to examine your heart, to examine where you're at, and maybe just maybe, today is the day where you take that step towards the reality beyond, called the eternal reality of the heaven, of God's heaven, and the reality of his kingdom in this world for us here and now.